Jeffrey eats gross carbs like oats and brown bread. He eats the right amount of protein, the right amount of fat, and he gets in all his micronutrients, but... uh-oh. Jeffrey is making a huge mistake. He is not following his ancestors. Jeffrey isn't only eating meat. What is wrong with him? Adonis. Adonis only eats meat. He knows that these dumb, healthy carbs are bad for him. He only eats meat. And of course he eats, sugary, unhealthy cookies when he's trying to gain muscle because they are so calorie dense and small and easy. He is truly an alpha male. I get this notification on my phone, right, and I read it, and it says like Carnivore Diet. That's all I really read from this title. And instantly, I frown. I get a horrible feeling. I know this is going to be awful. I know it's going to be bad. And I really did not want to see this. I knew immediately the video would be filled with bad takes, with actually zero advice, which is unfortunately the typical sort of videos you get here. I knew there would be zero science stated. I knew it would be essentially bro science anecdotes. And I started watching it. And the first time I watched it, I couldn't even get past the first 10 minutes. It was hurting me too much. I saw how bad this was. And I knew I needed to make a rebuttal, but I'd have to watch the entire thing for that. And then someone told me that Hamza eats cookies to bulk. I was in shock. I was in disbelief. Cookies on carnivore when trashing carbs. Look, I really don't mean to ad hominem. I think it's a really unethical way to argue, and I'm gonna not really use it other than for like comedic effect, because attacking someone's character isn't really a good way to, rebuke something. It's a bit stupid. But I do find it pretty hilarious, man. Like cookies. Oh, come on. Anyway, I teamed up with a guy called NutritionQuackCheck. That's really hard to say. I actually said it like a few times before this, and I had to edit it out, which doesn't usually happen when I record things. But this guy is the absolute goat when it comes to nutrition. His entire goal is removing the quackery that... I can't use these words, okay? It's so difficult. He needs to change his terminology to something else. But, just be on the look for his rise, because he's definitely going to start getting up there. The guy is so smart, and the things he's putting together is insane. He's just waiting in the shadows to come out and just surprise the world. Now, the whole reason we're doing this is we don't want anyone to delude you with beguiling speech. That's kind of what's going on. There's a lot of really messy things. And if you're actually true, and if you're genuinely curious about the truth of carnivore, please stay till the very end. I'm actually putting on my gloves today. I'm bringing out studies, which is something I haven't done in I don't know how long, because I do like the level of trust, and if someone asks in the comments, I'll provide a study. But I love that. So let's get into this, man. There's going to be 3 sort of issues that commonly come up. The first is anecdotes. And that's fair. Anecdotes aren't a problem on their own. It's fine to have anecdotes and stories, and I find it's a very, very useful way to teach people. And I'm even going to end up doing that myself. But when we're talking about something as important as changing your diet, something which is literally providing sustenance for your life, and you're telling your audience to do something, you cannot rely purely on anecdotes. You need to have some sort of empirical data. You need to have some science. I hope that makes sense. Here's the thing. Do you guys actually think we can trust anecdotal evidence? No! If I tell you a story about how I walked out and I was walking and I looked down and I found a briefcase of money and I was like, wow. And then I was so happy with this briefcase of money. And I was walking, and then someone beat me up because they saw the briefcase of money and they took it. And now I don't have that money anymore. Is that believable? Like, there's a few things going on. We've got believability, which is fair, it's an anecdote. It doesn't have to be believable, but there is always the possibility of someone lying. And now there is also the additional possibility of someone not actually knowing what caused it. If I wake up and my beard is a bit longer than you... my beard... If I wake up and my facial hair is more than usual, and the day before I chain smoked cigarettes, which is something I don't do, and I'm like, man, it must be the testosterone, it must be the manly cigarettes. I don't actually know what caused it. I'm just kind of guessing. That's my anecdote, the story of what I think caused it. But even then, if I have one sort of response to something, how can I be certain that everyone else is going to have the same thing? It's just not how it works. That's why anecdotes are kind of like, they're fine, they're funny, they're short, they're sweet, but they're not good for being reliable. And there is another thing, there is contradictions. Like, there's a few contradictions. The biggest one being the cookie. I'm sorry, it's not ad hominem. I just need to bring it up for, like, a contradicting belief. The idea of, the absurdity of talking about how these things are unclean and you can't have them and it's poisoning your body and it's toxin, and then talking about eating cookies. It's not really... It doesn't make any coherent sense. But I don't want to focus on the cookie any more than comedic value, like I've said, because it's very easy for someone to watch this, like, say this video blows up, which I hope it do, because I want to, we want to stop these guys from following this diet. We put a lot of work into it. But I don't want someone to view it and be like, oh, he's just making fun of the cookie. And, like, no, please. And the last thing is kind of like a huge thing, which is this whole ancestral fallacy. And this is something I want to mention once, and I'll briefly probably mention it again later on, but I don't really want to repeat myself, right? So this whole kind of debate, this whole war of ancestral eating habits versus, like, non-ancestral. If we go back far enough, the food isn't even cooked. Like, we could add extra steps in. Is raw food the real ancestral food? Can we not even eat cooked foods? Like, there's no real... They're just words. They're just buzzwords at the end of the day. There's also a thing called... Pleiotropic. There's also a thing called pleiotropic antagonism, and this is kind of the idea that there are trade-offs between traits that are advantageous at a younger age and ones that are advantageous at an older age. So these traits, these genes, to boost survival until a level of maturity, may actually have a detriment later on in life. And food, along with other exposures, will interact with these traits. So ancestral food is kind of seen as this, tried and true. It's been the diet for generations. It's optimized for young stages of life due to natural selection. The thing here is non-ancestral foods haven't actually been in our diet for generations, and yet they could still be healthy. If a scenario occurs where the outcomes are the same, they're not actually subject to this sort of evolutionary pressure which takes away from longevity. We are actually less likely to have drawbacks in later life from this, like, new non-ancestral food than ancestral food, because we're not used to it. And this is one of the reasons why saying something like, oh, it wasn't eaten by our ancestors, that doesn't make it any less beneficial. In fact, the opposite is more likely to be true. We also have this whole, like, natural versus synthetic thing. Where does it end? Like, where does it genuinely end? Is cooking not natural because we're interfering with that sort of process? We're not, like, taking it off wherever it comes from. We're not just cutting into the cow and eating it. What makes it synthetic? Does the addition of having a microscope and observing these things, does that make it synthetic? When we have things like creatine or supplements or protein powder, is that unnatural? Is that too synthetic? Where is the line actually drawn? Because it's clearly somewhere between, like, fake meat and cooking meat itself, but no one actually knows where this lies. Like, no one is clear on the exact parameters involved to say, yeah, that's not natural. And alongside that, how does countless years of selective breeding with plants and animals affect this? Because the OG cow is not our current cow. Neither is the OG carrot. You could even look at, like, photos of bananas from way back, and it's a completely different beast. It really is. So is our food even natural at this point? And this won't stop Hamza for saying things like,
all we have to do is eat real food that our ancestors ate, and instead we eat fake food that's made in labs by evil scientists and companies,
and
we are eating super processed, unhealthy, high-carb diets.
But these are unfounded claims. There is zero scientific backing in pretty much everything he says. Although I would love to hear your experience on this sort of thing to contrast with, so please feel free to share. There is also something I'd like to point out. In a meta-analysis analyzing the difference between low carb and high carb, they found that there is a 30% mortality reduction on keto, which basically means if you take keto, you're probably going to live 30% less. That's a huge amount. And that's with statistical significance. It isn't just like, monkeys throwing at a dartboard. But again, I want to reiterate, please do not take my word for this. Go into the description, read the studies, learn, actually make sure you're not just blindly following someone, because I would hate that. Anyway, we're going to start on section 1, which is going to be lifestyle and success.
Especially when it comes to work, the carnivore diet will make you an absolutely relentless entrepreneur or successful student.
So the thing Hamza just said creates this idea of, if you're not carnivore, you're not going to become successful. Dude, how many successful people are on the carnivore diet? Because some of them may be. But is Elon Musk? Is Jeff Bezos? Is Bill Gates? Dare I say, is Donald Trump? These guys, they're not on carnivore. It's not going to make you any less successful. And even then, what about someone who has a sort of dietary restriction where they can't exceed a certain amount of protein a day? Are they going to become more successful when they eat protein and they die? Probably not. Although I don't want to do stuff like that because that's kind of worthless, but there is nothing that makes someone more successful on carnivore than not on carnivore. Dude, this claim needs some sort of evidence. We could argue the thing that makes you relentless is discipline to sticking to this diet. But you don't get discipline solely from following carnivore. If you're going to switch to some sort of restrictive diet, it needs to have benefits that are more beneficial than not being in the restrictive diet. Anyway, that was a really, really small section. I'm sorry, but there is a lot more to come, I promise you. Section 2 is going to be about nutrition and health. That was almost like an introduction to a few things I just wanted to touch upon. This first thing is so bad. You understand that beef and eggs, just ground beef and eggs, have barely any nutrients. And when I say barely any nutrients, I mean when we're talking about the entire scope. Of course, the nutrients it has is, it has plentiful. But doing carnivore without some sort of organ meat, without something like liver, dude, you're gonna get scurvy. Where is the vitamin A? Where is the vitamin C? Where is the vitamin K? Where's the folate? Where's the calcium? Where's the potassium? Where's the magnesium? Where is the vitamin E? It is not present. It really isn't. You could maybe get enough vitamin E if you literally spammed eggs. We're talking 10, 20 eggs. It's lacking, man. It really is lacking. That is not better than a well-rounded, balanced diet.
But when you have no carbs in your system, it makes you work out more like a Spartan who doesn't need the rest. You rack the weight and it's you literally feel like you could go again straight away. You don't even want to touch your phone for the 2-minute rest break.
Really? I mean, if you bulk, of course, you can have some cookies to get it. I'm sorry. But what about athletes? What about guys who are actually trying to get better in the gym to have the best athletic performance possible? Do you really think that carbs, which are one of the best things they can live on, one of the best things that can power out their workouts, do you really think that they're not important for athletic performance? Apparently, Hamza has just, overridden the inherent biological preference for glucose in high-intensity aerobic performance. Don't know how he's done this, but he's also completely ignored the rest times that are essential for optimal hypertrophy because CrossFit style is better. CrossFit style is better at what? Maybe becoming good at CrossFit. I mean, what else is there? And what about carbs and just not looking flat? You see, your muscles are glycogen stores. When they're not filled with glycogen, they smooth, they flatter, they less round, they don't look as good. Why would anyone want to contribute to that? I know that is purely aesthetic, although there are, of course, benefits to actually having the very usable glycogen inside. But even visually, you'd probably want that over it, and it's not actually taking away from anything, so there is another thing which we can talk about. Now, I also want to talk about the whole thing of, carbohydrate addiction being real. I don't know if it's something he mentions, and he has some cookies. I'm so sorry, but there may be a little adherence to a very strict diet may result in wanting some sort of dessert. Like, that's normally what you crave when you're dieting hard. Like, I'm in a very aggressive cut right now. I'm on 1.5 thousand calories, and all I can think of is like popcorn and like those little puddings, which are actually disgusting. The like gooey puddings, and that's all I can think about. And then he has cookies, and it kind of just looks to me like his body's craving something, and he's just going for it, and then coming up with a, oh, that's ad hominem. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I'm sure you can be addictive to sugar. It is an addictive thing. Like, we wouldn't crave it, we wouldn't want it all the time, we wouldn't struggle with consumption of sweets if it wasn't addictive. At the same point, who sits there and goes like, I want a bowl of brown rice right now? No one! Like, I do that about steak. I am so addicted to steak. Do you know how often I have craved steak? I'd probably have a steak addiction. Is that bad? I mean, I guess not, because this is I could just hop on Carnivore and all the steaks all I want. But I want to bring it. But actually, we are gonna explore something later, which speaks about weight loss with actually eating till you're like full, or eating till you're done, when we're comparing like plant-based and animal-based. That will come up later. But when we're talking about these addictions, I have so many carbs, which I don't dislike. I don't dislike the taste, but I just don't want to eat much of it. Like, I would not want to eat a ton of brown rice. Likewise, I'd probably not want to eat a ton of couscous. It's just very filling for me. It's flavorful, but it's too much. And cookies, yeah, I could eat endless cookies. So if you're trying to get some carbs in and you're trying to stay healthy, we can argue that satiety is a completely different thing, and we could probably utilize nuts or something. Like, realistically, if we're trying to get extra calories in, we should use nuts. Although if we're having zero carbs, we should definitely have something carb based. Are cookies a way to do it? Probably not. I will admit, a very, very raw sort of, a very fast absorption carb will probably be good. Like, grinding out some rice or having some honey. Like, before and after the workout, that's probably gonna be best. But throughout the day, yeah, we should throw in some carbs. Like, there is no loss we have. And there's this whole idea too that you can't have like mental clarity if you're eating like pizzas and sandwiches. But does that matter? Does that actually matter? If I time my carbs around my day and I time it around my work, do I really need to care about that? Because we're spending a lot of time in the day sleeping. No one complains about, you really shouldn't sleep because you can't work, you can't have mental clarity when you're asleep. Yeah, I'm sleeping, man. But at the same time, if I organize myself in a way where I'm not working all the time, which you shouldn't do, no one should work 24/7. If I organize myself like that, what is wrong for having some carbs? If there is some downtime and some brain fog associated with that, if I time it around the workout, if I time it around not working, why does it matter? Why do we have to have 100% uptime all the time? And also, I've noticed that I don't even have brain fog. That is, again, something I'm going to touch upon later, because I have tried these sort of ketogenic diets. And no, there's no difference. Is this a bad thing? Is it actually a bad thing? Because when I do a workout, I'm pretty tired after it. Does that mean I'm going to stop working out? No. Our brain, people say that the brain thrives on ketones, but our brain needs glucose. In fact, the brain cannot run without glucose. And yes, our body has ways of converting things into glucose so that we can use it in the brain. But when people say this whole like, the brain works super efficiently on ketones, it is not even running solely on ketones. You're literally converting glucose, or you're converting something into glucose to use it in your brain. You're not like excluding glucose from your brain. You're like, I'm Superman. Like, that's not how it works. Dude, there is zero citation for this.
5 pieces of fruit and vegetables a day, right? Your ancestors didn't have that. None of them were fat. None of them had diabetes. None of them had cancer. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, none of them had any of these issues.
This is really, really dangerous. And here, what are we actually talking about? We're talking about mind or body. Because if we focus on the body, no. If we look ancestrally, we can see the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Peruvians, and all these guys experienced coronary heart disease and coronary artery calcification thousands of years ago. They were just eating meat. We also have, this 5,000-year-old man who was frozen in ice, who consumed an ancestral diet. He had coronary heart disease. He had coronary artery calcification. We've also got evidence from mummies that suggests that the 18th and 19th century Lithuanians consuming their traditional high meat diet still experienced coronary heart disease and coronary artery calcifications. Is the body not better off when we incorporate things like legumes? If we take legumes, there is literally a 37% lower chance of cancer. And this diet would lead you to believe that you can't have legumes because they can be bad for you. They're also hugely important as a predictor of survival in older people, which also comes back to some of that, antagonistic pleiotrophy. I really struggle with that word that we spoke about earlier. There's also this sort of idea that comes along. Right? It's more of like an undertone and implied idea that meat-only diets are almost like proven to have no harm in humans. Now, I will contest, there is no actual clinical research on pure carnivore diets. We do have 4 randomized controlled trials, and these are sort of like the gold standards for effectiveness research. And these are focusing on comparing extremes of keto animal-based and then plant-based low-fat. In this one study, we actually found that a low-fat diet led to 689 calories less energy intake than a low-carbohydrate diet over 2 weeks, and 544 calories less over the final week. That's pretty huge, man. We've also got this study here which came to the conclusion that among generally healthy adults, contrasting plant with animal intake while keeping all other dietary components similar, the plant products improved several cardiovascular disease risk factors. There were no adverse effects on risk factors from plant products. That's pretty interesting, man. We also have this study where participants were able to eat what they wanted, so literally just based on hunger levels, satiety, etc., and they both lost weight on the diets, with no significant difference in weight loss. However, the participants on the low-fat diet lost 0.6 kilos of body fat, but the low-carb diet did not result in any significant body fat loss. And the body fat loss between the diets was statistically significant. That's kind of huge. We also have the study which showed that exposure to a low-fat diet resulted in significantly lower ad libitum energy intake, which is just like satiety levels, eating till you're full, compared to a low-carb diet, which is potentially due to lower energy density and greater fiber content. Now, I'm not here telling you to switch to some sort of, plant-based diet or to become vegan or something, but these are pretty important, especially when we're talking about risk factors and how it can actually help you control your hunger and how it can help you preserve your muscle. There's a lot of things at play here. Now, I'd also want to touch upon the sort of idea, because we're talking about some studies now, right? And there is an idea of averages and also contradicting evidence. So it would be weird if outliers didn't exist. We have to give them the proper weight relative to the vast literature supporting limiting intakes of meat, including, unprocessed red meat. So for example, there is a Hong Kong pro-meat association where a population with some of the longest life expectancy eats the most meat. Well, the issue with the study was ecological fallacy, which also holds true for smoking. More developed countries will end up smoking more. We can come to more informed conclusions by looking at the totality of evidence and whether or not the guidelines or the review of actual scientific journals, the totality evidence rings true from biostatisticians. Not just, some shirtless dude like rambling for about an hour about how everyone has been lying to you and he's enlightened because he has access to this additional 50% of neural function, like he's from Limitless because of meat. Now, if you don't follow totality, you're just contradicting yourself. You're accepting one form of research whilst rejecting another of the same weight. Weight is actually weight being defined as kind of like its place on the evidence-based pyramid. Now, Hamza does this with his lecture on plant toxins, where there's no actual given explanation or overview on how they interact with human physiology. Yes, there are chemicals in plants. There are lectins, tannins, oxalates, phytic acid, and the list goes on and on. But how do we actually give them context within the human body? Do they create issues in the context of the food which contains it? Are they therefore worse than other foods with scary chemicals? Meat has something called Nu5GC, which is a very complicated word which I can't pronounce. And this promotes something called trimethylene N-oxide. And when cooked has polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and also heterocyclic amines. Now, all of which are associated with adverse outcomes. So how do we actually figure out what's good or not? We have to follow the majority of evidence. The highest quality evidence, as on the EBM pyramid. The highest, which is human outcomes on the whole food, not one mechanism or pathway blown out of proportion, not some sort of experiment on, some dead sort of thing where it's not even alive. It really is a shocker. It really is a shocker bringing in science without even accepting science. I don't know how someone can do that or take the sort of toxins for any sort of. Anyway, section 3, fitness and exercise. This is where I really shine. Most of the stuff before was very heavily helped by NutritionQuackCheck, and this is where my time to shine has finally come.
I'll hit the set, and then you take the 2-minute rest break or the 3-minute rest break, and even that, you feel kind of tired. You just want to go on your phone, and you need longer and longer and longer and longer. But when you have no carbs in your system, it makes you work out more like a Spartan who doesn't need the rest. Like, you rack the weight, and it's like you literally feel like you could go again straight away. You don't even want to touch your phone for the 2-minute rest break.
Man, 2 minutes of rest? 2 minutes? Okay, first off, if you only feel like you need to rest 2 minutes after doing a set, you're not going hard enough. I'm sorry, but there is no way you're going hard enough. If the second the set is finished, you're like, okay, I can go again. Because if you're really pushing yourself and you're really straining yourself, you will not be able to contract the muscle. That's kind of what training hard is all about. You see, we have something called calcium ions, and this is actually the biggest level of fatigue that kind of stops our actual muscle fibers from contracting. So I'm actually going to explain calcium ion fatigue in a similar method to Hamza's used, and you may have seen this one before. So calcium ion is kind of like this piece of sticky tape. It holds the muscle fibers together for a contraction. Now, when you actually move, this is quite fresh. It's very easy to do, strong muscle action, but with repeated and intense use, the tape ends up losing its stickiness each time. And so as the tape becomes less effective after multiple uses, we can kind of see this as representing how calcium ions are losing their ability to make the muscles contract efficiently. Now you see, eventually the tape actually loses its stickiness. It doesn't really stick as much in it. It falls off. The calcium ion fatigue has occurred. The muscles are not contracting together as well. You're weak. You're fatigued. You're not actually able to push it all the way up. And that's calcium ion fatigue. And that happens no matter what. You can't somehow have a diet which makes it where it doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. Because that is a very actionable way we can present muscle fatigue. Yes, we also have CNS fatigue. Yes, of course, we also have CNS fatigue, which is something where if you're doing a really heavy set of something heavy like deadlifts or squats, I'm sorry, but if you're not fatigued by the end of that, I don't care what diet you're on. I don't care how good your cardiovascular system is. If you are not fatigued, you're doing something wrong. You're not pushing hard. Same with cardiovascular fatigue. If you're not getting cardiovascular fatigue and CNS fatigue and calcium ion fatigue, then you're just doing something wrong. And if when you're sitting there, you're like, oh, I can go again, then there is something wrong, because there is no way you reach anywhere close to some sort of actionable level of stimulus. There is no way you actually came close to any sort of effective stimulus when you can instantly go again. I don't know if this was some sort of hyperbole or some sort of exaggeration of the facts, but the way it's presented is as if you can just continuously go, and that's why CrossFit is better, because it's an exercise where you can continuously go. It does not work that way. I'm sorry, and calcium ion fatigue as well, you cannot feel it. It's a fatigue you're not able to notice. So some people will be like, oh yeah, I know I can go again now because I feel ready to go. There is a reason we have this sort of like 3-minute minimum, because you're not able to feel when you're ready, but 3 minutes is a good time to know when you're ready. In fact, there's an entire study, which I can't remember the exact numbers, but I'll leave it in links below, and I'll pop it up now if I'm able to. And it will actually tell you that the difference between 3 minutes of rest break and like 1 minute resulted in like having to do 17 sets or something to get the same sort of results. I can't remember the exact thing, and it'll be there because I don't want to mislead people. I really hate that sort of thing, but that's interesting. Now, there's also this sort of like idea almost that like bulking's kind of shameful. It's kind of unnatural. It's kind of disgusting. And honestly, it probably is when you eat a ton of cookies. And you have this sort of naturalistic fallacy where it's like, oh, we can eat meat. Bulking is one of the best ways to gain muscle, man. And if we're talking about general health benefits of gaining muscle, the ones that there are, say we're talking about some sort of insulin, how well you can deal with it. More muscle is so good for when it comes to insulin sensitivity. They are a glucose sink, which basically means the more muscle you have, the better you're at handling insulin, because your muscle will take a ton of those carbs. Like 80% or something of the carbs are basically going to your muscles to be stored there, to be burned, or to be used, just to be big. That's the sort of thing that happens. In fact, a 2011 study found that for every 10% increase in muscle mass, insulin resistance reduced by 11%, and the prevalence of diabetes reduced by 12%. Later on, we are going to talk a little bit about how being on carnivore actually means you grow less muscle, so you get less of this benefit as well.
To maximize like how much muscle you can make, you only need to eat like 0.8 grams per pound of body weight.
Really? Okay, so another randomized control trial conducted with bodybuilders who followed this 8-week energy balance keto diet ended up finding that a significant reduction in total body mass and fat mass, respectively. Now, here's the thing. This may have happened for the keto diet, but a group following the sort of typical isocaloric westernized diet, where it's like 55% carbohydrate, did not. Now, of note, only bodybuilders in the westernized diet showed an increase in muscle mass. That's really not looking good for keto. But what about more protein? He did actually end up getting one thing right here, as there's not really too many extra benefits when we get above that, 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight per day. There's no significant further benefits, and
we've wanted to pack on muscle mass by going to the gym, and yet even though we train quite hard, the results that we've gotten is quite poor.
What? No. So now, if you remember earlier, we actually mentioned a study where we got a bunch of people to eat what they wanted. One was low fat, one was low carb, and we actually got the low fat one losing fat, and the low carb one not really losing fat, not significantly anyway. So can we really say that this is going to result in massive muscle gains and you're going to pack it on? Probably not. Probably not, man. You're going to be better off going for the carb way. And even if we talk about some sort of different, we're not going to talk about that specific study, we're going to talk about mechanisms within the body. Let's talk about insulin and muscle growth. Now, you see, insulin is mildly anabolic, which just means, inducing of muscle mass, essentially, at least in the context we're using. Now, this on its own isn't too great. It's just a small bit. But the thing about insulin is it is highly anti-catabolic. Now, catabolism is the loss of muscle mass, and being highly anti-catabolic is huge. You see, the change in muscle mass is kind of like a scale. So on one side we have anabolism, and on one side we have catabolism. And when anabolism is higher, well, I don't know how the scales will work, but I guess it'd be lower to be higher. But when one is more than the other, it will result in growing muscle or losing muscle. And so protecting the catabolism, making sure it doesn't occur, is really, really huge, even if it's not contributing significantly to the anabolic side. I think what you also have to realize is catabolic and anabolic states aren't actually like, for this month you're catabolic, for this month you're anabolic. It's actually kind of like a window of time. Like, it's a state that happens many, many, many times throughout the day. And the idea is you're trying to minimize the catabolic times and maximize the anabolic times, unless you want to lose muscle, which probably is not very many people. This last section is speaking about the total disregard for science.
Those people who criticize this diet have never even tried it, not even for one day. So their opinion doesn't matter.
What? This oh, this pains me when people say this sort of stuff. This line of reasoning, it really pains me. Now, this is very similar to the idea of a no true Scotsman. This is very, very similar to the fallacy of a no true Scotsman. And I'm going to try and explain this with a story about one of my favorite characters in all animated shows, Scrooge McDuck. You see, in DuckTales, Scrooge McDuck is the richest duck, and he prides himself on being a true adventurer. We could even say true Scotsman, but I'm going to use adventurer for the purpose of this, although he is Scottish. And Scrooge, he has a very strict ethical code for treasure hunting. He believes that true adventurers, they don't use shortcuts. They don't cheat. They rely on their skill and their courage and their wits. Now we have the second richest duck in Duckburg, and also the world, because Duckburg is like, I guess, the two richest guys in the world are in Duckburg. But this is like his arch nemesis, and this guy is called Flintheart Glomgold. And this is his arch nemesis, right? He's the second richest duck, and he's consistently challenging Scrooge. He's consistently trying to be better. Now, in this story I'm making, because I'm not actually going to use an actual episode, I'm just going to use it to demonstrate something, and I can't recite episodes from the top of my head. Like, I'm not that crazy. But in this fake episode, Flintheart challenges Scrooge to a treasure hunting competition for the golden egg of destiny. That's a pretty cool prize, right? You see, Scrooge accepts this challenge, as he often does. He's eager to prove what a true adventurer is, to prove his own credentials. And so they both set off in their boats to find this treasure. Scrooge proudly declares that he's a true adventurer. He only uses his smarts and an old-fashioned map. They arrive at the treasure island, and Scrooge uses his map, whilst Glomgold... Do I have bags on the way? That's really bad, man. That's really bad when we're talking about health and longevity here. Let me see if I can fix that. That's kind of better. Okay. So, they arrive at the treasure island, and Scrooge is using his map. But Glomgold, he's using a high-tech gadget. He's got this treasure-seeking radar. It's like a little gizmo, and he's pointing in different directions. And Scrooge looks at him, and he reacts negatively, right? He states, no true adventurer... I can't do a Scottish accent, but he states that no true adventurer would use a gadget like that. It's against the adventurer's code. And Glomgold challenges this line of reasoning, this narrow decision. He points out that a true adventurer is simply someone who seeks adventure, someone who seeks treasure, and that there is no rules against using tools. Now, of course, Scrooge he's a stubborn man, he's an arrogant man, but he's also a reasonable man. He has intellect. That's part of what made him so rich. So he has this epiphany. He realizes that his definition of a true adventurer is rigid and it's exclusive. He decides to stick to his code, but at the same time he opens up to different methods of becoming a true adventurer. There's this thing in the DuckTales universe called the Junior Woodchuck's Guidebook, and it's kind of like the Scouts. He has a like, has a lot of influence over this group. I don't want to give too much away, but he makes it so that the Junior Woodchuck Guidebook has a broader definition of what it means to actually be a true adventurer. He decided that people need to discover this on their own. They can have their own code, but he shouldn't really be forcing it upon them. And so life in Duckburg changes. All the young treasure hunters, all the young junior woodchucks, they embrace their own unique approach to adventure. Now Scrooge, of course, he still believes that his method is the most rewarding way. But he's now acknowledged that it's not the only way to be a true adventurer. So, saying this sort of thing, Hamza actually protects any counter-arguments. He protects any criticisms from anyone who hasn't tried it, purely because he removes the ability to use logical reasoning, expert opinion, or scientific evidence, unless you've tried it. This is very similar to Scrooge and Glomgold. In each case, there is a standard of what is constituting a true adventurer or a true Scotsman, to try and, exclude counterexamples or different viewpoints that challenges their own personal views. But when we say that only the opinions of those who have tried the diet matter, we're actually shielding the diet. The same way Scrooge shielded the concept of a true adventurer from being questioned with a specific and self-serving definition. The goal is to protect a claim or a belief by invalidating counter-arguments that don't meet an arbitrary standard. And this is kind of the issue here. It goes alongside a lot of the fake naturals. No, I want to make it so clear. I'm not calling him a fake natural in any way. I do not believe he's a fake natural. But a lot of fake naturals will do something. They'll live a certain way, and then they'll be like, well, Liver King! I just remembered the Liver King! Liver King lived in such an astounding way, and his literal defense was, you're not doing what I'm doing, so how do you know it's not true? And anyone who knew anything, anyone who knew the science could say, dude, come on. But in truth, all he'd have to say is, you're not me. You're not living this way. and no one could really do anything. So starting today, I'm only going to be eating meat and cookies. No, this is too expensive for most to try. Like, most people can't eat day in, day out carnivore diet, and that's kind of part of the issue there. And we could even, maybe like someone has a quarrel and then they have their own sort of like limiting beliefs, where instead of being shielded from a bad diet, they're shielding themselves from the belief that the diet's bad. So it'd be something like, oh, I know why I haven't really reached this enlightenment yet. It's because of the seed oils in my meat. It's because it's covered in plastic. I'm not saying these things aren't harmful, though. I don't really believe seed oils are harmful. But I am saying that they will start giving themselves these sort of like mini doses of cope to continue the diet and to continue perfecting it. And then eventually they've spent so much money on something where they're actually getting a ton of negative side effects. You see, I have tried carnivore before. I have tried keto before. And I'll be honest, compared to completely maxing out my chronometer stats, compared to having the right amount of macronutrients, the right amount of micronutrients, good sleep, good workouts, the difference wasn't impressive. It wasn't great. It wasn't anything. If anything, I'd say it was negative. My workouts were worse. And so I want to touch upon a new thing. There's this whole idea that after doing this for like a year, you're going to be looking at someone who's completely transformed their life. Here's the thing. Someone who's hopping on this diet, someone who's within this community, is likely going to be someone who is continuously trying to improve. And I want to point out a very important thing. There's a difference between quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative is relying on data, qualitative is relying on guessing pretty much. And also, this should be an anecdote when you reach that sort of point where you're actually gauging whether or not it changed your life. You see, studies are collections of many, usually quantitative anecdotes. And so if we're going to trust anecdotes, if we're going to trust one man's story, we should probably trust a collection of the stories over them, which are actually occurring in a controlled manner. And say we do this for a year, we're on self-improvement, we're continually improving parts of our life. Can we accredit the man we've become to the diet? That's a really important question, because if we're improving everything, one thing can get progressively worse or be, a little bit worse than it should be, and we're still going to make a world of a difference. Now, this is disregarding the fact that some people actually get very serious side effects on stuff like keto or veganisms, and after years, they actually end up stopping because they're like, wow, this is not good. And sometimes it does sneak up on them after years of following the diet and feeling good on it. In fact, there's actually a whole Instagram page which is dedicated to people who have tried carnivore specifically and eventually or immediately had very severe symptoms. So I really urge you to go to @CarnivoreCringe and just having a look over there. I know this is anecdotes, but we can almost call this a study because it's a collection of those anecdotes. Anyway, can we say that before doing this, Hamza was actually eating 100% optimally? Was he getting in all the macronutrients, all the micronutrients, and all the quality of food being good? Can we be assured of this? I don't know. Maybe he can let me know, because I'm not sure. But if you don't go from that to carnivore, then we can't really judge if carnivore is the best diet if we're not going from something which is scientifically the best. Now, this is also a guy who continuously works on himself. So when he talks about how carnivore has made him the best he's ever done, and we know he's doing all this other stuff behind the scenes, again, can we really accredit it to the carnivore diet? And here, what metrics are we even gauging this on? Like, there's a whole thing, correlation versus causation. And I'll give you a simple example. I used to play Bed Wars at the time. I used to stream Bed Wars. It used to be my main way of entertaining before I started this whole thing. The time I stopped playing Bed Wars was also the time I started going to the gym. Can I say that the reason I started gaining muscle was because I wasn't playing Bed Wars? Is that what caused it? No! But if we had a chart of muscle gain and time without playing Bed Wars, it would look that way. I could convince you. And if we have two completely different axes, what metrics are improving because of carnivore? That's just a question I really want you to think about. Like, what can we actually trust? And let's be extremely, extremely over generous. And I mean, the sort of, Santa Claus. I'm now Santa. I'm now Santa, right? I'm flying around the world and I'm giving kids presents whilst volunteering also for the Salvation Army 24/7. I'm also in a soup kitchen, and I'm also just being kind, helping my neighbors, checking in on them, making sure that they're doing well. I'm giving them, gifts of food. Every time someone moves into town, I always knock on their door and I'm like, hey, you want to come over? I've made some food. Ooh, whilst doing all of that 24/7. I am very generous. And so let's assume that this diet alone is resulting in these incredible perceived benefits because he's just special. And I don't see how that informs us about long-term health. Let's have a sort of illustration here. Bob, okay? Bob has a friend. Bob's friend tells him how good cigarettes are. Bob is hesitant, but eventually Bob is swayed. Now, Bob begins to smoke cigarettes every single day, and he doesn't really have any issues. But he has all these mental benefits. The nicotine makes him feel good, it makes him feel sharp, it makes him feel smart. And he's a smart guy, man. Bob did some research, more research than Hamza did, I assume. He knows that smoking will reduce his chances of endometrial cancer and Parkinson's disease. And it also has a bit of an anti-estrogenic effect. You gotta get down that estrogen. He also feels great the more he smokes. So what he realizes is smoking various herbs has been integral to various cultures for eons, man. And so he decides to up his intake more and more and more and more. He's got no issues. In fact, if he's lucky, he might never have issues. But of course, we can see that Bob is not doing something healthy. You don't feel cancer cells mutating and overtaking your lungs until it's too late. This is something you can't really detect. It just happens. And similarly, LDL cholesterol, which is risen by saturated fat, doesn't even significantly correlate, much less cause heart disease after a decade. But when the plaque finally breaks off and you're clutching your chest in agony and you're on the floor, it's apparent that your high saturated fat diet wasn't that great. Now, it won't happen to anyone. And you've heard these stories about someone who ate like Burger King every single day or drank like 5 Diet Cokes every single day. Well, not Diet Coke, but actual Coke. You've heard these stories about the woman who smoked every single day and she's now 120. These are outliers. These are anecdotes of a 1 in a million scenario. So yeah, it won't happen to everyone. And it definitely won't happen for a while, especially if you're generally healthy. But even in metabolically healthy people, death from excessive meat consumption can come eventually. These are a few of many examples of your immediate senses. We can say instant gratification. These are many examples of them not being the best reference, including from an evolutionary standpoint. You see, your genes, your senses, everything about you only needs to be good enough to reproduce. That's how it works. The window of selective pressure, long before most get their first serious health event. Your biological perceptions are under little obligation to service you.
The thing is, we don't actually care about the research, the science, the education, the what the fat doctors say.
I mean, here just... Really? We kind of spoke about this earlier. This is what we're going to end it on. You should always care about what the science says. Everything is science-based, whether you like it or not, man. Even if you're a bro scientist, doesn't mean the science ain't real. Even if the science hasn't caught up yet, or the science hasn't experimented or adapted or evolved or explored that sort of region of the world or that part of your diet or what. I'm just saying words now. But even if the science hasn't come to the conclusion, the science is what it actually is. This is how science works. It's very similar to Marvel when they're like, oh, there are no gods. We just don't understand them. I don't think that's even the accent of the person who says it. But what you got to understand... What am I saying? I don't know why I was speaking like that. What you got to understand is... Science is true. Science is truth. It is the exploration of truth. And we have things showing us bad. So, essentially... The conclusion is do your own research, but understand that this is not a healthy diet, it is not sustainable, and it will not give you benefits. In fact, it will take away.